Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. The notion of networking, connecting, establishing relationships, being referred by someone else has changed over the years. In this age of LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and whatever, the sole purpose of networking seems to have come down to how can I collect more people and use them for my benefit. People brag that they have 1,000 LinkedIn connections. In fact, the number of LinkedIn connections a person has seems to define them in the minds of others who play the LinkedIn game. But what does that mean? Particularly today in a me-centric, disposable society. Glenna Crooks is an expert in networking and even better, networks. In her latest book, The NetworkSage, Realize Your Network Superpower, she describes how we live life supported by 8 network groups and shows how to nurture and optimize those connections for mutual benefit. Glenna, welcome to 30 Minutes.
Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you here. I've wanted to have you on for a long time, but your schedule and my schedule just didn't work up. It was, I guess, something you sent out. You regularly send out blogs. Do I characterize them as blogs? And there was one in particular that caught my attention, and we'll discuss that during our visit. Glenna is an expert on networking. As I said before, she's a PhD. Was an appointee of President Reagan, a global vice president for Merck, and a company and foundation founder several times over. She's a consultant, coach, speaker, keynote speaker, and author, and has been called the one-woman think tank for her work as an innovator in education and healthcare. That's a mouthful, and it must keep you very, very busy. We first met when you attended one of my 10 meetings, the Entrepreneurs Network.
That's right.
I don't even remember how we connected.
I don't either.
Yeah, but you showed up, and I remember being impressed with your credentials and the work you were doing, including work you were doing with some early stage companies, aspiring, budding entrepreneurs. And we just kept in touch after that. Do you agree with my opening statement that the whole notion of network and networking has been commercialized? It's lost its authenticity, I think.
People are doing what they're being taught to create a elevator speech, to shake hands and make eye contact, to get a card and to follow up later. For some people in some professions, that's an important thing to do. It's a necessary thing to do, but not for everyone. And even for those people, while it might be necessary, it's not sufficient. Because not only do they need to network, they need to understand the 8 networks, as you've described, that I've been working on, so that they know strategically how to network better to add to capacity that they might need in one of those networks.
But for what purpose? That's what bothers me today.
Yeah. Well, here's my view about that. And while this might seem egocentric or person-centric, I'm actually looking broader than that. And it's because of how this came to be in the first place. So many talented people that I know are burning out because life is just so complicated. I went looking for a solution, and I found it when I wrote about it here in the book. And I do encourage people to think about life and what they do through their own eyes, through their own lens. And it's not out of selfishness. It's because I believe that every person is absolutely unique and important to progress as a human race. You know, we are the product of 500 generations of ancestors who lived before us. Now, we all know enough of our own family history and human history to understand what our ancestors went through, suffered through, died for, loved about, and because of that, we're here today. Which says to me that not only do we have a right, but we have a responsibility to use this life well. So what does that mean in terms of the work that we do? If we do, it will have honored all of the sacrifices that those people made, and it will make life better for people who come after us. And there's another thing, too. Not only are other people in our networks, or what Robert Downey Jr. called pit crews, we're in theirs.
Yes.
And so we can't contribute our part of the need that another person has, be it a work colleague, a family member, a friend, somebody who might be in our religious congregation, somebody who might be in a community group where we volunteer our time. We can't do that unless we're supported. So it all kind of comes around and goes around. So for me, it does go both ways, which is, I think, what you're arguing for and suggesting as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, the problem I have is millennials and those even younger who are coming out of school. Forgive me, allergies are killing me. Sorry. Are being advised, you have to network, you have to network, you have to learn how to network. Even if you're shy, you go a wallflower, you go hide in a corner. If you go to a meeting, you've got to learn how to network. And it's being imposed, it's being forced. There's something mechanical about it. It's not authentic. Unlike when I was a youngster 100 years ago coming out of school, it was important that you knew some people, warm introductions were important. Everybody knew that. But there wasn't this fanatical focus on networking. As you know, there are networking groups, there are courses on how to network, there is your book on network and networking. What's happened?
Your comment resonates with what I'm told by educators. High school guidance counselors, college admissions officers,
Yes.
and professors and so on have shared with me that they're very concerned that students don't really understand what it means to build a network. And so they've been encouraging me to work in ways that will better acquaint young people with this. This is especially important, by the way, for first-generation college students, because they may not have the family connections or the community or even their high schools may not have set them up in a way that will help them to build the networks that they will need to get good internships and then to get good jobs later. So this is actually the sort of qualitative antidote to some of that frenetic networking that you're talking about.
There's I won't dwell on this, but I was told by my State Farm agent, whom I've known forever, and has always been very helpful. And I asked him not long ago, how's business? And he said, it's good. He said, but it's, we're having some difficulty with millennials. And he said, millennials don't understand relationships. He said, we deal with millennials by emails, on the internet, by telephone. We never meet with them. They don't want to meet. We do it all through the internet, electronically. He said they don't understand that when they need me, it's important that we have a relationship before the need. Now, I've lived that. I know how important it is. We've had a relationship with this guy for, as I said, decades. And it's the relationship that's important. It may cost me a little bit more. I probably could get a better deal on auto insurance someplace else. But it's important for me to call Jim and say, Jim, I've got a problem, or I need your advice on something.
That's exactly the case. And it's not just with somebody like an insurance agent, but everybody else that you engage to support your life. When I lived in the suburbs of Philadelphia here, I had a home with very mature trees. So I had somebody come out and look at the trees every year, take out the ones that might threaten the home and make sure that they were all healthy. Well, my neighbors didn't do that. One afternoon, their tree came down on my roof. It was that really good connection that I had with that arborist that got him there in 20 minutes. And he got the tree off of my roof without doing any additional damage. It's those, for one thing, having a connection with another person is pleasurable, it's fun, and it is absolutely needed by our brains. We're mammals. We depend on connections with one another. But then when times get bad, we really need them. And oh, by the way, when good things happen, we want people to celebrate with. And that's the human connection that we need. You're right about that.
And when bad things happen, we want someone to commiserate with.
Well, to step in and help us out. I mean, there are two, there's no certainty in life except two things. There will be good times and there will be bad times. We need people both times.
In your background material, and you've already indicated, education and healthcare are the two areas where you seem to have done most of your work. Why? And what innovative work is being done by you and perhaps others using relationships and the importance of relationships in education and in healthcare?
I'm a boomer, and in the era when I entered the work world, assuming a woman was going to have a job at all, the only acceptable jobs were teaching and nursing. And I knew from a very young age I didn't want to do either one of those. But I had an uncle who was a principal who had a fishing buddy who was a school psychologist. So that became the direction that I got steered by my family. Now, I really did like kids, and I wanted to make the world a better place for kids. When I started as a school psychologist, I was in Indiana. At that point in time, children who had a special need did not have a legal right to an education. So I went into homes and found children who were 17 years old, who in the vernacular of the day were, quote, retarded, who were really deaf. We were watching case law at the time emerge in Pennsylvania that finally did establish the right of children to an education if they had a special need. Now, before that law passed, however, the case was settled and then laws were later passed, I became the developer of what are now known as IEPs, or individual education plans, piloting those in my own area within Indiana. The State Department of Education saw that, and that's how it became eventually law within the state of Indiana. Now I got burned out and did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was go back to school and get a PhD. Now, I wanted to influence the lives of children earlier. Sometimes when I saw them at the age of 5, I thought it was too late. Well, the first system to do that is healthcare. Once I went into healthcare, I never went back to education. I've been there because it's been so fascinating, and there are so many opportunities there to make life better.
Mostly in pediatrics?
Not exclusively. Although that was my interest and where I wanted to focus, when I was appointed by President Reagan to that position, my portfolio was all of health. In the United States and a number of programs that touched health in the rest of the world. And so that took me through the entire gamut of age ranges and disease conditions and situations like the first Tylenol tampering.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was your involvement in that?
I was part of the team that was managing that when it broke. Trying to understand what was happening, working with law enforcement officials.
Oh, when you were with Merck?
No, I was with Reagan.
Excuse me. Oh, okay.
So when the poisoning happened, of course, this was a public health and safety issue. So I was part of that whole public health group. We were working with law enforcement in the Chicago area where this happened, with McNeil, the company that made Tylenol, gathering all of the information, determining what to say to the American public, and then what rolled out after that in terms of packaging changes. So I was on that policy side, looking at what should our response and our policies be with regard to that.
That must have been fascinating.
It was terrifying. And there were 5 theories about how the poison got into the bottle, and 4 of them endangered my family.
Oh, really?
My family was all back in the Chicago. They lived in the Northwest Indiana, Chicagoland area. They shopped at Jewel food stores. I mean, where they had come from. And my niece at the time was a child and ill, and I knew she might be taking children's Tylenol.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was a very scary time.
I can imagine, given that set of circumstances. Is your attention now shifting? Shifting is the wrong word. Are you spending more of your time, talent, and professionalism on the other spectrum, the other end of the spectrum, aging and the aging process, older adults?
That's my next book.
And that was the blog that caught my attention because of my personal involvement with a caregiving company.
So the title of the next book is The Senior Sage, Building Networks to Support Today's Longevity Pioneers. It's about 90% done. Now, I'm writing it because seniors have asked for it. A number of seniors have used the current book to plan to age in place very successfully and successfully avoided assisted living and other expensive caregiving options. But they say it's pitched to working adults, and they're right about that.
Yeah.
So the next one focuses more on the senior experience. And with my premise being that we're encountering something we've never encountered in human history before.
Yes.
We're going to live another 30 or 40 years of relatively healthy lifespan, and we're going to do it without large, close-by families to help us out. Families are smaller today.
You're right.
Half the size that they were 50 years ago. In addition to that, 40% of people live on average 700 miles away from family. And then if you do have family nearby, women are the traditional caregivers, and they're in the workforce. So they're not available. And then you add to that the fact that we no longer have deep, deep ties to social institutions like neighborhoods and churches and neighborhood schools and clubs and so forth. Add to that, 14 million seniors have no family at all. They're called elder orphans. You may have heard that term. And 25 million boomers never had kids. So if they are single or they divorce their spouse or they outlive their spouse, they're likely to become elder orphans too. This is not something we've ever encountered in human history.
Glenna, I'm getting depressed.
Oh, I wouldn't be. I'm here to say I have seen absolutely stunning turnarounds in people who have understood these networks, have been able to diagnose where they're suboptimal, and then built plans to optimize the support. And so people who, at one point in time, I'm thinking about one woman who first did this when she was 87. She's about to have her 91st birthday. She successfully avoided assisted living. She is still volunteering in her community. She's very active in her neighborhood. She's a good friend to other people. She still drives.
Purposeful living.
Absolutely. I mean,
So this, as well as your new book, are the antidote to the loneliness and isolation that too many seniors experience?
Absolutely, I'm hoping so.
Some by choice.
I don't know that any human being chooses to be lonely and alone. I think it happens by circumstance. And it happens...
By choice in that they choose not to do anything about it.
Oh, in that sense. Although, you know, sometimes that's the result of depression too.
Yes.
Or there's a health condition that prevents them from getting out.
Yes.
Or they live in one of these over 55 communities where there's no mass transit. And so they have to drive in order to be able to get out. And even if they can find a driving service, we're so accustomed to the freedom of being able to get in our own cars that that's a barrier for them.
Do you favor aging in place over institutional living?
Absolutely.
Aside from the economics, because it can be very expensive. And the reason?
The quality of life is not good. It's not as good. We've even seen how the lack of autonomy, the lack of decision-making ability, because the staff will do it for you. Here's what I'd say to imagine people. Imagine your absolutely favorite 2 or 3 restaurants. What if I told you that was the only place you could eat for the rest of your life? That you couldn't cook in your own kitchen unless it was microwavable. That if you were, even more severely impacted by an aging process or a disease condition, that you couldn't even do that. You know, there's a study that took plants. They put plants in the room of nursing home patients, and to some patients they said, "Don't worry about these plants, we will take care of them." To other patients they said, "You're going to have to take care of this plant." Just the act of taking care of the plant helped these people be happier and healthier.
But let me play devil's advocate with you on this, because it is an area in which I have a professional and personal interest. I'm willing to make the trade-off for the safety, security, peace of mind, and having people available when I need them in an emergency situation to assure my well-being. I'm willing to trade off some of my independence and the flexibility I might otherwise have to do what I choose to do when I choose to do it. Furthermore, I hate forced fun, and I hate being told I have to go to a class to learn to do something because it's good for me. But I'm willing to do that because I know it's good for me. Isn't that the mindset that most people have when they perhaps reluctantly move into, I think mostly reluctantly, move into these institutional living environments? The trade-off, willing to make a trade-off?
I would say this. If that's absolutely the only option for somebody, then absolutely it's necessary, and I would support that. However, I'd want them to go through this process first. I'd want them to be sure.
Let's talk about the process.
Yeah.
By the way, the book. The book is The NetworkSage, Realize Your Network Superpower. I have one of the few autographed copies in the world, right? Right there. Rick, may your adventures be sage. Thank you for that. How's the book doing?
It's doing well.
And where is it available?
On Amazon is probably the best way to get it. And both in Kindle versions as well as in a softcover like you're holding.
And a quick plug for the new one. When will it be out?
I need about
90% finished.
90% finished. And it's when something's 90% done, that means there's 90% to
the
go.
Last 10%.
Yeah. So it's gonna. If somebody would give me. We had a 3-week snowstorm in Philadelphia and I couldn't go anywhere, this book would get done.
What is the process, and what are the eight network groups?
Okay, I'll start with the network groups.
Okay.
This is going to be totally intuitive, I think, for people. So the first 5 I call birthright networks because you were born into them. Your parents created these for you. If you have children, you created them for your children. First, a family network, then a health and vitality network, next, an education and enrichment network, fourth, a spiritual network, and fifth, a social and community network. And each one of those networks has got some subgroups that I go into in the book. Now, right from the time you're a child, you start changing those networks, to suit you. But never in your entire life will you outgrow what these networks provide for you. You will need it forever, okay? Then you mature into 3 more networks that I call coming of age networks. And I think this makes sense too. The first one is career network, which is where we usually think about networking. Next, there's a home and personal affairs network. So home, what kind of a household do you live in? Is it a single family home, or is it a condo or an apartment? Because depending on what it is, there'll be more or less work and responsibility you'll have. And then personal affairs are things like your banker, your insurance man, your car dealer, your jeweler, people who help you protect and grow your assets. Okay? And then finally, you have a network that I call ghosts. I didn't go looking for these, but they showed up in the work I did with people. Ghosts are people who used to be in your life who are no longer. They passed away, they moved away, your paths diverged.
Yeah.
What we know about the amazing brain we have is that regardless of how brief an interaction is, everybody who comes into our lives makes an impression on you, for better or not.
Yes.
And that can make a real difference, in some of your attitudes. For example, my ancestors lived long lives. My grandmother started her last career when she was 73, worked at it for 20 years and died on the job. I mean, that's my expectation, that she's a friendly ghost for me in my perspective about aging. A lot of people would not have that in their lives. Now, the process involves 3 steps. The first one is you've got to become aware of all of these types of people in your life. And when you do the first cut of that, and using my book would help, or getting coaching from me will help you do that fast, and eventually I'm going to have an app that'll make it even faster and more accurate. You don't even have to put a name down, you just have to identify. Here's all the types of people in my life. 70% of Americans don't have an up-to-date will. That means either they don't have a lawyer or they don't have the right lawyer in their life, okay? Young men don't have a doctor. The time to find one is not when they're sick. And urgent care only goes so far. Millennials need to know that. So that's the first step. You see what's the lay of the land and where might your networks be suboptimal. The older woman that I mentioned, she had a very good, intimate network, social network, but it was small. So our advice to her was that she join a singles club and build new friendships, which she did. It was a good thing because within a very short time, 3 of the 4 best friends she had announced that they were relocating to live closer to their adult children. So she lost 75% of her intimate network practically overnight. Good thing she had these other friends, okay? So the first step is to do that. The second step, though, is to really look at, is it working for me? Where might I prune? Is my hairdresser always keep me waiting? Does my doctor not really listen to me? Do I need to change something here to make this better for me? And then the third step is to take action on that, to tell people who need to know. In part,
what does that mean? Tell people
who need to know about making these changes, or what your needs are. Here's one that's really important. Couples divide workload. So frequently, one spouse will know something that the other does not. In the book, I tell the story poignantly about a young woman who died and left her husband with 3 small children. He didn't know the name of the pediatrician because she took care of it.
Right.
You know, so couples need to share information. I've seen the same thing happen with business partners. One partner has relationships and connections that the other partner does not. One partner knows something that the other does not. So in whether it's a personal life or a business life situation, if you lose your partner, you've lost more than half your heart. You've lost all the information that only they have. So that sort of sharing is important, and that's part of that last step as well.
Does moving, and it sounds like it's an ascendancy, does moving, if not up, through the 8 network groups, to some extent, is that affected by socioeconomic
Absolutely.
conditions?
Absolutely. And the thing about it is, since you're in the middle with all of these networks arrayed around, and you're sort of the connector in chief, the strengths and the weaknesses of any other part of your network will show up in force everywhere else.
Right.
So if you have parents who are professionals and that's the career you'd like to pursue, it's going to set you up for the best college experience and the best internships and the best jobs in the future.
Right.
If you're first generation, that's not the case. If you're a mom who's got children and your pediatrician always keeps you waiting or doesn't return your phone call, that's going to ripple through the rest of your day. It may prevent you from being a working mom. So, you know, so when I deal a lot with people in careers, and what I remind them is that the strengths and the weaknesses of every other network are going to show up in your career. If you don't have a plumber you trust, and you get up in the morning and find a leak under the sink, you don't exactly go to work with a clear head. You know.
It happened yesterday, as a matter of fact.
I'm so sorry to hear. I hope you have a good plumber.
It did. No, well, he showed up anyway, earlier than I had expected, thank goodness. I lost my train of thought. That trolley will be around again. Tell me about the app that you, no, I know, that's what it was. Thank you very much. Technology. What impact has technology had on everything you've described so far? I mean, we have 15 grandchildren. And now we have 4 great-grandchildren. And I expect they're going to go through the same thing that our grandchildren. They come into a room with their devices and they go off into a corner and they are isolated. They're in their own world. They don't communicate. They don't interact. They're not learning anything. There's nothing that's coming out of that experience for them. They're simply vegetating in a corner. Doesn't that have an impact on the ability and the desire to network?
It does. And
because we're using these devices as proxies for relationships.
We are, and that's something that I'm concerned about as well. And if you may or may not have heard that Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg have not let their children use those devices.
Yes.
And as is the case with a lot of people in Silicon Valley, I've talked with a lot of parents, and it's truly becoming an addiction.
Yes.
And when they take devices away from a child goes through all the stages of withdrawal.
Yes.
So the trade-off, I think, is that while the devices can help us to get access to information which we need, they can be in the way of having a real connection with other humans and animals, and we need that too. Yeah. So it's, I think, one of the more challenging dilemmas about parenting these days.
Glenna, regrettably, the clock on the wall says we're about finished, and I truly regret it because I had so many other things I wanted to talk about. Will you come back?
I will.
I'd love to have you back and talk more about this book and all the experience that is behind it, as well as your new book on seniors. All right? Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome.
My guest today has been Glenna Crooks, who is, among other things, an author and speaker. You can get her book at Amazon, the NetworkSage, Realize Your Network Superpower. Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. Take very good care of yourselves.